Hello, and welcome to Astronomy 100. In this video, what we're going to do is wrap up our topic of how we organize the sky. And if you recall, our main thesis through all this is the idea of using constellations to allow us to organize various regions of the sky. And in the previous videos, we've talked about the basic idea of constellations, and then of course some of the details that go into how we create rules about the constellations and bordered regions in the sky. Now in this one, what we're going to really do is concentrate on naming things. And of course, in any science, giving names to things is an important idea. And you can imagine when it comes to the stars in the sky, that if we try to give names to all the stars in the sky, well, that's a lot of names. A couple of numbers that I'll give you is on a good, dark, clear night. So if it's a night where the moon is not out, and you are in a good, nice, dark, remote location, somewhere in the mountains far from any city, you can see anywhere from about 3,000 to 4,000 stars at any given time. And that's really just limited to how dark or how faint we can see with the human eye. The human eye has a limitation to how faint of an object we can see. Now imagine trying to come up with a few thousand names for all of those stars. It would be a daunting task. And the ancient people of the earth never really tried to name all of the stars. Throughout history, what the ancient people did was they would give names to stars that were meaningful. If it was a particular star that represented something important in their culture, or if it was a particular star that did something kind of interesting, they would give it a name. And we would call these proper names. A proper name is like Jim or Kathy or Susie. Your own name is a proper name. It's not a generic name, it's a name for you only. And so the idea is that many of the stars do actually have proper names. And it's usually the brightest stars that have these proper names. And there are about 420, 430 stars that actually do have proper names, unique names or names unto themselves. And the names go all throughout the culture and history of the earth. Some of the names go all the way back to the Babylonians. Some of the names were given to the stars by the Greeks, and many of the names were actually given to the stars by the Arabic culture. And it was really in about the 5th and 6th century that the rise of the Arabic culture became really the place where a lot of astronomy was done. And so many of the names that we have for the stars today are Arabic names. Let me show you, I'll show you a few here. The constellation called Orion is an easy constellation to find. And the stars that make up Orion, the bright stars, all have proper names. And I'm going to show you just a few. But the 3 stars that make up the belt of Orion are Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The star down here is Rigel. Rigel is the foot or the ankle of the hunter. Here's the belt of the hunter. And the 2 shoulders up here, his head would be here. And of course, one of the shoulders is the very famous, often mispronounced name, and I'm going to say it in the standard way here, is the star Betelgeuse. Now, the name Betelgeuse is an Arabic derivative. It originally was a very different spelling and a different pronunciation that was similar to this. But throughout the more than 1,000 or 1,400 years since the star was given this Arabic name, the name slowly morphed into different ways to pronounce it. And currently it is Betelgeuse, although it's just a derivative of what it originally was. So the problem is that many of the names are difficult to pronounce and spell. And the other problem is that it's very difficult for somebody in astronomy, somebody who's studying astronomy, to know hundreds upon hundreds of names that are often Arabic names. So there was a solution that was offered in 1603, And this was by an astronomer by the name of Johann Bayer. Here's his drawing over here. Here's a portrait. And what Bayer came up with is a way to make this generic so that if we can learn what's called the Bayer designation system, then we can point at a star and we can give it a designation or a name that everybody will understand regardless of the culture that the name may have originally come from. So in other words, it's a generic way of labeling stars. So let me show you how this works. This is just an imaginary constellation of stars. But what you'll notice is that when you look at all the stars in the sky, inevitably, in any one constellation, there are going to be stars of different brightness. Notice this one is the brightest, this is the second brightest, this would be the third brightest, etc. So Bayer said, in every constellation, let's label the stars with a letter of the alphabet, and the letter of the alphabet will be based on brightness. So an example is the brightest star in a constellation will be given the letter A. The second brightest will be given the letter B. The third brightest will be given the letter C. But what was customary back then, and still fairly to the point of today, is that in science, the alphabet that we use in scientific literature, scientific endeavors, is the Greek alphabet. So Alpha, or A, is the brightest star in that constellation. Beta is the second brightest, Gamma is the third brightest, Delta is the fourth brightest, etc., etc. Now this is only part of it because obviously if you have 88 constellations, there are 88 stars given the letter Alpha. Every constellation will have one star that is the brightest of the bunch. And every constellation will have a star with the letter Beta. So how do you distinguish between all the alphas in the sky and all the betas in the sky? Well, that's where the second part comes in. What you do is you add what's called a possessive ending to the alphabetic letter. And possessive simply means possession. So in other words, what constellation possesses that letter for that star? So it'll be a Greek letter, and then it'll be the name of the constellation. So let me remind you, it is Alpha is the brightest, Beta is the second brightest, Gamma is the third brightest, Delta is the fourth brightest, etc., etc. But then you add the name of the constellation. So let me give you 3 examples here. So the brightest star in the constellation called Centaurus, Centaurus is the constellation, the brightest star is Alpha. So Alpha Centauri is the brightest star in Centaurus. If you were to go outside and find the constellation of Centaurus and locate the one star that is the brightest in that constellation, you could say that is Alpha Centauri, and everybody will know the star that you're referring to. So as long as everybody knows how the system works, and as long as you know the constellations, you can now give every star in the sky a label that is understandable using this Bayer designation system. Here's another example. Beta Cygni is the second, right? Beta is the second brightest star in the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. So the constellation is Cygnus, the second brightest is Beta, so Beta Cygni, second brightest in Cygnus. There is also an Alpha Cygni, there is also a Gamma Cygni, just like there is also a Beta Centauri and a Gamma Centauri and a Delta Centauri. So it is just a way to generically name the star based on the way that it looks. Now, here's a third example. A very famous star is called Delta Cephei, and Delta Cephei is the fourth brightest star in the constellation of Cepheus the King. There is also an Alpha Cephei, there's a Beta Cephei, but again, those would be brighter in appearance than this one would be. So you could now point to the constellation of Cepheus, count down to the fourth brightest, and that one that you are now pointing at is Delta Cephei. And if you call it that, everybody knows which one you're talking about. So this system works, it works quite well, but the problem is in astronomy, there's no rule that says you have to use the Bayer system. Let me give you a few examples. An example is in the constellation of Orion, the brightest star in Orion using this system, the brightest would be Alpha Orionis, Alpha Orionis. But everybody's going to call it Betelgeuse because it's just habit. We've always called it Betelgeuse. It's known as Betelgeuse. And so the problem with astronomy is there's no rule that says you have to do one versus the other. And so it becomes quite complicated because a lot of it is just what are habits and a lot of it is what is common practice. And so an example I'll give you is one of the brightest stars. In fact, this is the brightest star in the summer sky. It's not the brightest of all stars, but it's pretty darn close. It's the second brightest star. It's called Vega. Vega is its proper name. And if you go outside in the summertime, you'll find it very, very bright. But using the Bayer designation system, it is called Alpha Lyrae because it is the brightest star in the constellation called Lyra. So Alpha Lyrae is its Bayer name. But what is also done is every single star in the sky has been cataloged. In other words, astronomers take telescopes, they sweep all throughout the sky, and they actually put the stars that they find, they enter them into a catalog. It's very much like a phone book used to list all the names of all the people who lived in a town. A catalog, a star catalog, lists all the stars that are in the sky. But the problem is each institution has their own catalog. And so many of the colleges and the observatories around the world have their own catalogs. So an example, the star that we call Vega, that's its proper name, in the Bayer system is Alpha Lyrae, but in the Harvard Revised catalog, it's entry number 7001. So you could call the star Vega HR 7001, and that is actually its name in this catalog. The Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, it is entry 067174. So you could say, I'm going to look at the star SAO 067174 tonight, and that actually makes technical sense to an astronomer. And just a few other examples, one of my favorites, there's a German observatory called the Bonner Observatory, and their catalog in German is the Bonner Durchmusterung. That is not a mispronunciation. Bonner Durchmusterung catalog, it's entry 383238. So you could say, I'm going to go out and study BD 383238, the Henry Draper catalog, the Hipparcos catalog, just to name a few. There are actually more than 24, maybe even more nowadays, more than 24 catalogs. So it's very confusing. And throughout this course, and if you go on and become an enthusiast of astronomy, what you're going to find is that it is going to be very common that you're going to see names of stars that are very bizarre. And it's partly because of the heritage, the name that it may have been given thousands of years ago. Part of it may be it's a Bayer designation. Part of it may be it's a catalog designation. And so many people, when they ask me, why is that star given such a strange name? It's because of one of those reasons. And to learn astronomy means you have to start to learn some of the systems and of course the habits that we use when it comes to giving the stars names. Now, in the next video, what we're going to do is kind of wrap up this introductory topic by describing how we create maps of the sky, the ability to create a very accurate map of the sky. So I hope you'll join me then.